So in this video, we're going to talk about library resources. Now, much of what I say will be generalizable to any research library. However, I will be focusing specifically on resources available through Ball State University. But if you transfer somewhere else or you go somewhere else for grad school or become affiliated with another university in some way, keep in mind that the resources are very similar. So, why do we use library resources for research? Well, libraries are optimized for research. That's what they're there for. Libraries compile material, they archive material, and they organize it for the researchers so that they can save time and energy for those researchers. Before libraries were as well organized as they are now, researchers had to sort of come up with their own way to figure out how to find things, and it was very difficult. So we are very thankful for libraries in that regard. Libraries are available. You have them. They're everywhere. Um, Libraries save everyone money and other resources by pooling resources together because you may only need that article once, but the general population needs it hundreds of times. And so if it's in that library, it's available for those hundreds of times, even though you only used it once. So you didn't have to go buy access to that item. Rather, you are a participant in the library, which then on your behalf buys that access. So finally, libraries improve our general knowledge as a culture by gathering the knowledge together, making it accessible so that there can be communication between researchers, um, and by developing ways to make that information searchable and findable when needed. So there's many different kinds of libraries. Um, the differences between these libraries is entirely about who their audience is. Actually, it's the same way that the difference between texts, between your rhetorical purpose and so on, is going to be dependent on who your audience is. So, um, public libraries are for general use. They often focus on entertainment, arts, personal enrichment, entry level knowledge. Some also have a section that specializes in community history or genealogical records. So they're a local resource for everyone in that community, but they don't necessarily go very deep into any one subject. If you need a handbook on how to um, start a garden, you'll absolutely be able to find several of those in a local public library. However, if you are a horticultural specialist and you want to know about specific uh, strains of GMO products, you're not going to find that in that public library because that's not something in demand enough in that community to be worth the library investing in that resource. Government libraries serve a slightly different purpose. They keep records, they document significant events, and archive significant objects. They provide some legal assistance by giving people access to the records that are necessary for coherent legal proceedings. Um, and they assist in projects of public interest such as infrastructure and public health, and they help to establish the cultural identity for their constituents, and they have a few other functions as well. So it's a little different than your public library, but you can see how they overlap. um, so for instance, many researchers will at some point wind up going to the Library of Congress, and you actually need a research project that you can explain to get the pass to do that. Um, but the reason that they would do that is because the Library of Congress's purpose is to archive a huge amount of things, everything published in the U.S. Through a formal publisher and so on. Um, so if you need something obscure, it's there. Um, Part of its position in government is if a lawyer or a lawmaker or a citizen working on a case or working on a proposal or something needs access to legal proceedings for precedents, that's where they're going to look. But what you're probably going to be using for this assignment, definitely going to be using, and probably going to be using for a little while yet, is the university library. University libraries are optimized for research and knowledge generation. As a result, they tend to focus on published research, archiving rare items that might be of use to researchers, and making sure that research is available in the most practical ways possible. So they make a lot of resources available that are common researcher tools. They provide databases, they catalog and store physical research materials, they have librarians, they will purchase subscriptions on behalf of researchers for academic journals, for software that assists with research, and for any number of things. And they also provide a hub for technology and resource access and support. So obviously, libraries are a researcher's best friend. Um, so for your purposes, what you'll probably use most is the databases. So a database is a specialized index of material. And sometimes it's a repository of the texts themselves, but it always has some way of finding that material, usually through a citation. It uses tags and metadata to find material. It is not a search engine. Your interaction with it might be similar to your interaction with a search engine, but databases are not search engines. So how is it different? So you've got your search engine like Google, and you've got your database like Academic Search Premier or ProQuest or Google Scholar, which is not the same thing as Google, although they're owned by the same thing. So a database is different because a search engine uses predictive algorithms, natural speech patterns. Some may use things called spider crawlers that seek out information about web pages and so on. They're not specialized in most cases, and search engines may have paid content that they boost intentionally because someone paid them to do that. Whereas a database doesn't use the same kind of predictive algorithms, so paid content doesn't even work. That's not a thing for a database. It doesn't use natural speech patterns, so it does take a little bit of practice learning how to talk the way the computer wants to hear. So you can't go into a database the same way you do with Google. Like with Google, and you're just like, what is the weather going to be like tomorrow? Or, you have some other question like, what do penguin eggs look like? Whatever your question for the day is. Um, a, a search engine can handle those phrases. In a database, you wouldn't use a database for the weather, but for the penguin, you might have to simply write penguin and egg, and I'll talk about that in a second. So it doesn't interact the same way, even if it feels a little similar, because they're not working the same way underneath the surface. So the really cool thing about the Ball State Library is that we have this thing called OneSearch. And OneSearch will search not only all our databases, but also our library catalog of all the things we have at the library, and a few other resources at the same time with the same input. However, at some point you may have to choose your database. So when you choose your database, you want to consider the scope of your project and you want to consider the subject of your project. There are some broad general databases, such as Academic Search Premier, Google Scholar, ProQuest, and I always forget the other one. ProQuest, JSTOR. And those, for most undergraduate work, will be sufficient. There are also many specialized databases, and especially if you're in one of these fields that uses a lot of research, formal research, I should say. All fields use a lot of research, a lot of formal academic type research. You will want to get familiar with those specialized databases. For instance, in my field, we have the MLA International Bibliography. We have a few others as well. You might be needing the Web of Science, for instance. So think about that. And then it's okay to use more than one database. and OneSearch can optimize that for you. So I've run into I don't know how many dead ends, and then I was like, oh yeah, JSTOR exists, or oh yeah, ProQuest exists. So use multiple databases to help you. Some of them will only return abstracts, and some of them will give you full text online, and some of them will simply give you a citation. Use your database accordingly and use your limiters accordingly. So when you use a database, you'll want to use keywords instead of phrases. And then if one set of keywords isn't working for you, look at synonyms for those keywords. And so you generate those keywords from your research question. And then you want to use what's called Boolean operators to combine your key terms. So there's and, or, not, and wildcard. And not all databases use the wildcard. And is your most common, and it actually makes your search smaller. It seems like it should make it bigger, but it makes it smaller because when you say and, like in my penguin example, if I say penguin and egg, then it will only return articles that have both the phrases, or both the words penguin and egg. So it won't just talk about penguins and it won't just talk about eggs, but only both. Or expands your search. If I write penguin or egg, I'm going to get everything that says penguin and I'm going to get everything that says egg, whether or not they overlap. So in that case, it wouldn't be useful. Not limits. So maybe I don't want to know about emperor penguins. Penguin and egg, not emperor. And so it'll remove everything that mentions emperor penguins. So these are ways you can limit or expand your results depending on how effective your results are being when you put things in. It's going to take some practice. It's going to take some finagling. Every research project is different. But these are ways that you can manipulate your searches to get different things back from the computer. So what do you do if you get stuck? Well, try different keywords. Think of synonyms. You can look at the results you are getting, and it may include tags on that. Like one of your results might have tags. Go ahead and click on one of those. You can try a different database. Like I said, I can go in and maybe Academic Search Premier is not giving it to me, but JSTOR might have a whole lot about it. And finally, you can ask a librarian. We have wonderful librarians, and even if you are not on campus, they have several ways you can contact them online, through email, through text message, through chat on the website, and so they can always help you, and I think there's someone available 24/7. So ask a librarian. They are so well trained in finding information that I don't know what we would do without them. So they're your best friend for a project like this.